I think we're ready to go, Dr. Lisle.
Fantastic.
Thank you for being here today to have our third episode of Eat When Hungry. And this is an exciting one because I think for many reasons it showcases your work in a really powerful way. And then I am applying my experiences around your work in a way that might hopefully help some of the viewers think about their own lives and find their own agency in their own journeys, which is really what a health, wellness, and weight loss journey is about, because no one can do the work for you. But it is so helpful to be able to learn from others in the journey. And so, for that reason, thank you for being here. We've had a couple episodes. Do you have any thoughts off those previous episodes?
Well, I think that I think the first thing that if sometimes people might just be skipping over and jumping in on this episode. This may be the first thing that they hear, and so it's useful for us to reflect for a little bit on some of the things that we've talked about. And one of them, and the most important thing, is that you have had a rare journey. So very few people have sort of walked the path that you've walked. So people have changed their diets in good directions and they've had some good results from it. But you had a remarkable transformation, and these things, they don't just happen overnight. There was a whole history behind this, but if you'll just share a little bit with people about just a little bit about your journey, because you lost half of your weight over a period of about a year or so. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that story.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a fast amount of time, and I really did lose a lot of weight in a very short amount of time. But it also was a lifetime of learning to get to that point. And I think that there's a lot of complexity that is a part of a journey like this, which is ultimately why I think we see a very high failure rate around sustaining long-term weight loss. And that is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here today, because it took me a lot of successes and failures to be able to understand the cause effect relationship of what was going on in my body with the food I was eating. And this is where I think we've got an intersection of my experiences with your work around that lifetime of learning. And I actually had lost most of my weight by the time that I actually knew officially of your work, although I think that I had been encountering resources that were very much informed by your work. And so I was shaped by your work before I knew I was shaped by your work. And in our first episode, we talked about the complexity, as I mentioned, of what it means to go through a journey like this. And then in our second episode, we talked about things around mindset and mental actions that are part of a journey like this. And I have since said in my social media that mental actions are a part of everything that I've done, but mindset and mental actions alone are not enough to do it. And that really takes us to today and to a verb that you used in our first episode around the overview that you shared around the pleasure trap. And that is how we override our systems to do what's best for us. And so I think because we want to do a summary, I would like you to do a short summary of your work too before we go into this, because not every viewer might be familiar with that work either.
Right. Well, the thing that I tried to get across to most people is that they're designed beautifully, but they're designed really for an ancient environment of scarcity. So our ancestors and most animals in the world are are face pretty tough circumstances in order to just get enough food to survive. They do. It isn't that they're starving, but they're on the edge a lot. And it's sort of the environment is not, sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's difficult and things are tough. And so they're designed by nature to be really well motivated to go after the richest food in their environment. It's truly a deep survival mechanism. And so that's embedded in all humans. And so the problem is that the modern food supply is not just rich, it's hyper rich. It's been artificially enriched. There's nothing like corn oil or pure sugar in the natural environment. So these things are super high calorie density. And as a result, what they do is the reward centers of the brain become hyperactive when people interact with them. And so effectively, people are eating far too rich of a diet, but their intuition is that they're doing the right thing. So it's a trap. And so that's what Alan Goldhamer and I call the pleasure trap. In other words, pleasure is supposed to be a reliable signal that tells you you're doing the right thing. Pain is supposed to be the signal that tell you where you're doing the wrong thing, but you don't feel pain when you're eating a Snickers bar. In fact, so you're doing some damage to yourself, but you think your intuition, your animalistic intuition is that you're doing the right thing. And so the pleasure trap is the story of how it is that our instincts can be fooled. And of course, behind that, what you're going to wind up with is a population now. We for a long time, for thousands of years, people have had some treats. Particularly the wealthy people have had some treats, but not like this. Not like everything is a treat. And so the problem is today, the reason we've got the epidemic of obesity and diseases associated with dietary excess is because the instincts are running amok in an environment that they weren't designed for. So the override is basically saying, listen, my instincts are in trouble. And so I've got confusion here. I've got one set of motivations pulling me one way, and they're pulling me pretty hard. Another set of motivations are things that I can learn to find out that it's a trap. And so it's a very difficult road to actually, get away from the big pull of the trap and go in the right direction. That's what's really unusually excellent about your journey, is that there's nothing about your journey that involves any gimmicks at all. Almost everybody's weight loss journey that you ever hear about is gimmicky. There's some gimmick they are using, whatever it is. They're using bariatric surgery, they're using Ozempic, they're using a ketogenic diet that is full of fat in order to trick the system. In other words, gimmicks it's chocolate shakes without sodium in them. It's slim fast. What you did was you learned the fork in the road, and you knew what direction to go, and then you just started going there, even though your instincts are pulling you off course. As the process goes along. So that's the sort of the overview of what it is that my job is to people, is pointing out that, hey, you're being deceived. This is a trap. And it's, once you see it clearly, it doesn't make it easy, but it makes it more possible for you to understand what the challenge is. And that's what you did. And we're trying to learn from you about what might be some of the reasons why you were successful, where it's not an easy success to be had.
Yeah, and that's really why I've gone public with my story, is to help people understand the personal nature of a journey like this, because you really do have to become your own agent of change. And again, like I said at the beginning of this, is no one can do the work for you, but it can be helpful to hear the stories and know the science behind why the journey is so hard. And that's why I want to go into today, which is really it's about the struggle, but also there's this incredible world on the other side of the struggle. And so these things are two sides of the same coin. There's the fact that this is a hard journey, but there's also the fact that on the other side of this journey, if you trust the process, it will take you someplace that is incredible and beyond your wildest imagination. And there are enough people that I've heard share their story where I think it's a pretty common experience for people who get to the point where they really clean up their diet. I've heard go to the final 10% around clean eating, and what a difference there is between that like 90% clean eating and 100% clean eating. And that is something that I can say that I've experienced too. And I often hear that described as if this were a pill, everyone would want it. And I'm here to share that my experience is the same around that. And I echo people who have gone before me. I echo people who are side by side in this. And I'm saying what people who follow this will probably say who might not be doing that in the future. So, or, what they will say in the future. So with that, I am going to share my screen and get into a little bit of a visual about what this looks like.
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to add before we get into this?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, let's take a look at this screen.
Okay.
Yes.
So in this journey, I titled this particular slide, Journey Down the Up Staircase. And the reason for that is because of what I just explained here, is that this whole type of journey is discombobulating. And I think you did a really great job of explaining why that is in your summary, that it feels like we're making the wrong choices when we're actually making the right choices because of the way the modern food environment is and these superfoods that are working as supernormal stimuli in our environment. And so this really is my journey down the up staircase, which gets at the fact that there's a mindset shift that happens in this journey. And a lot of times people only think about the negative things that are happening as they are giving up their food. And for me, that was the case for a long time is if I look at this visual aid, I've got a staircase here with an arrow that goes up and down the staircase, which recognizes the fact that this is a cause effect relationship. And so I might be like getting to the depths of what some of I call them triggers, but these are things that really disrupt my nervous system and get in the way of my hunger drive working as it should. And I have said publicly that I struggle with binge eating over the course of my years. I also am a volume eater. And so these are things that I know about myself, and that certainly if you looked at a before and after picture of me, you could see reflected in my journey as well. And what I've got here are different triggers that I had to give up in order to have my hunger drive regulate itself. And the part of the mindset shift that I want to call attention to is the fact that as I'm doing this, there also is this really glorious thing that is taking place in my experience and my body that is getting me closer and closer to what I have identified as the pinnacle of this experience. And when I am eating a clean diet of unprocessed plant foods in the balance that works for me, I feel this complete wellness sensuality that permeates every aspect of my being. And I remember learning about self-actualization in, various courses as part of my college career, as part of my educational background and that sort of thing. And this is the highest form of self-actualization that I have ever felt. And it is a sensory experience as well as an internal experience. And it is what people are getting at when they say, if this were a pill, everyone would want it. And so simultaneously, if you're making a change like this, there is struggle, but you are simultaneously building to this pinnacle of a really great physicality, and mental feeling that is unlike anything I ever felt in the standard American diet world.
Yeah, it's fabulous. So this is a one of the things that you're mentioning here that is kind of important as far as I'm concerned is that the it's kind of not just there's not just a physical thing going on, but that for you, what's happening is that there's a self-esteem strengthening where there's a feeling of moral rightness and pride that comes from doing a really good job. It's something that's difficult. And the thing about this is that that isn't with us early. Mm-hmm. So when when you say, okay, well, I'm gonna get to work on time because I'm usually dragging in 10 minutes late. The if you get up early one morning and get there 15 minutes early, it feels kind of good, but there's no big hit behind it because you don't believe in yourself yet. Okay. And you get a little bit of credit from anybody that sees this, but not very much. But if you do it 20 times in a row and you do it for a month, for 4 weeks, at the end of that time, your internal audience basically starts to believe in you, starts to, and so does everybody else. And so what you have is a reputational change, both inside and outside. And that's a feeling kind of like no other. And it doesn't happen early, but you have to invest in that process. And I think that in your journey, like many people have done something like this, you don't know that that's even in there. You're just seeking the result, okay? But what you don't, you think that when you get to the great place at the end, that there's going to be way better emotional life, which there are reasons for that to be true. But what you don't see is the extraordinarily important emotional journey that's taking place. And I have a young man that went through a similar journey coming out of drugs. His name is Adam Said. He's a fabulous young man, and in his presentation, he explains as he puts a picture of himself as an obese drug addict on the screen next to the guy that he is now today, and he says the hero in the story isn't the guy on the right that's me now. The hero in the story is the guy clear back then that actually took these steps to get here, even though there was no guarantees and he didn't really believe in himself. It's like, that's the heroic part of the journey. And it's a part that then builds, you know what I'm saying? Once you start to get that feeling of moral rightness about yourself, pride in what it is that you are doing, then you don't, as you say, there's no pill for it. There's nothing like that feeling, and that can only be earned. There's absolutely no way it can be handed to you. No, and so that's what I see. That's the huge transformation that's taking place that we don't see and that we're not even aiming at. And so that's an important part of your of what it is I think you're trying to describe.
Absolutely. And I think you've done such a nice job explaining that I don't need to have go further into that part. But I also want to have it not lost on our listeners here that part of that is a very real physical experience as well. This is a very physical process that I'm getting at in that visual aid, that staircases, when I remove these foods, it feels worse, like you were talking about with the pleasure trap. It feels worse before it feels better. For someone like me, I was more than twice my size right now, weight-wise, and that's a very uncomfortable place to be. It's, as you talked about, a very hard place to be to make the decision to come out of it, because it's not just a lifetime of, for me, failure that was at play there, but it's also making very scary changes that impact your identity, cause a lot of discomfort in your life in terms of, am I going to be enough to make this change, to overcome these foods that have controlled my life? And am I going to be able to handle all facets of that discomfort, including the physical withdrawal that takes place? But that is compounded by a lot of identity things that are going on at the same time. And there is the physicality that is part of the journey too, that at that place of transcendence, it is physical, it is emotional, it is mental, and it's all coming together. And what I could not have possibly understood as a previous version of myself is the depth to which that is a chemical reaction to food. And I talk about two contrasting verbs on that chart that I'd like to throw your way to comment on. One would be the idea of satiation.
Yeah.
I don't like the word satiety, so
Yeah.
I try to avoid it because I feel like that's the floor of the expectation, not the ceiling of the expectation. Like, to be satisfied doesn't sound incredible to me.
Yeah.
But satiation is an incredible feeling. And the really cool part about satiation that I have learned is that it feels emotional, but it's physical. And it's something I can create with the foods that I eat. And part of that is through the absence of the foods that make me prowl. And so I'm going to toss that contrast to you to comment on, because I've heard you talk about both concepts in different ways.
That's very interesting. You're tripping over something that's a little bit new that I don't know that I've ever really quite considered. That's why we're doing these kinds of things. And that is that you describe, if you're hitting satiation on foods that are natural to you, then there's a relaxation, like we know in digestion, that we know that essentially, to oversimplify, what happens is that as you're eating, or when you're beginning to eat, or even almost ready to eat, what's happening is that there's an excitatory process that's being facilitated by dopamine. In other words, this is your excitatory process. But as you are digesting food, you have a relaxing process, which is being driven by endorphins. So this is very much it's analogous to sexual activity being exciting during the process, but if you reach orgasm, then that's an endorphin storm. So it's dopamine, endorphin, and that's how this works. And so you're describing something interesting, which is that if you're eating foods that are consistent with your natural history, you have an excitatory process, but as you are getting satiated, then what's happening is that you're getting satiated at the right time. It now shuts down the excitatory process, and now you sit very comfortably in an endorphin storm, in an endorphin bath. It's like a warm endorphin bath. You're fine, okay? But if you are eating trigger chemicals, then you're not going to get there. It's not going to meet at the right time. The trigger chemicals are going to be pushing you, because of their supernormal status. They're going to be pushing you past what would have been your natural satiation point. And so, and that's kind of, in other words, and then people will report this frustration that there's something wrong with their satiety system. They're a crammer, they're a binger, etc. But what we find behind that almost always is we find some supernormal doctored up chemical. It's pushing it. And so, i.e., and if you've had it recently, then your memory circuits are going to be prowling for it. In other words, so if it's a common occurrence in your diet, then your nervous system knows that that chemical, that asset is in season. So if you've had it in the last 3, 4, 5 days, then you're going to be prowling for it even after satiation, because it's super normal. So yeah, you are describing a beautiful physical equilibrium that takes place when you did things beautifully, as well as the self-esteem rise, as well as the mental calm that comes with this whole thing of doing this well. Very interesting. It's really quite a it's more of an integrated feeling process than I had thought of it as, but now I'm seeing how that must have worked that way, and apparently did, because I think once you got into a groove, you just didn't leave it, pretty much. Or if you got rattled, you could really see the contrast between being rattled and being in a groove.
Yeah. And I think we talked at maybe it was episode 2 that I don't live in a clean environment in terms of uh, standard American diet food. And when I started in 2020, that was the time when I really became successful at it. I cleaned out my environment. I know this is something you talk about a lot. I did it first time when I was in my 20s. Now, I didn't probably clean out the environment the right way, but I had the right idea. I'm
Yeah.
sure there was still salt in my house. I'm sure there was still oil, and I'm sure there was still sugar, which I know are very problematic in disrupting my hunger drive and creating that sense of this animalistic prowl, which looks like standing in front of the cupboard, looking for food and looking for the richest food that's in the cupboard, and standing in front of the refrigerator and doing the same thing. It's determining that I'm going to head to the fast food joint and I'm going to get, the richest food there and indulge in that. And so those are some of the ways that it looks. And when I took on this journey in 2020, I made the commitment to myself that I thought being a food addict or understanding myself in that framework of food addiction was going to be enough. And I thought I was at the ending point, but I was still at the beginning of understanding that staircase and how deeply down that staircase I was going to be in order to go up the staircase to achieve that sense of well-being. And to, I think one time in our conversations, I asked you if something about getting off of the razor's edge, and you told me I would find a ledge, and that has been the truth in going deep enough down that staircase to identify the problematic foods to be able to live on a ledge of safety. And what that means for me is that it's not as hard as I ever imagined it to be around the foods that caused my destruction for so many years,
Right.
because I can play with that equation that is my hunger drive and make my life so much easier. But it took me several years to unravel it, to understand that equation. And I know that you talk a lot about this being a slow process, and sometimes people want to go so fast and that sort of thing. I did lose weight quickly, but I didn't find my ledge of safety quickly.
Yeah, interesting. Right. Very good. Very good. Yeah. Well, this is there's a lot of important pieces to this, what we're talking about today, and the yeah, I can kind of feel your favorite piece, which is trying to describe this a place where both physically and psychologically you're in a really good groove. And the I do appreciate that. I mean, I do appreciate what that must feel like and how important that is to be there if you're going to hold a really good group. This is as a psychologist, I tend to be most interested in the self-esteem part, and so but they're absolutely hand in hand, and it's more. Yeah, I think people. There's a beautiful phrase. I don't know who invented it, but I just heard it recently in the last year, which is that people massively overestimate what they can do in a day, and they massively underestimate what they can do in a year. And that as anybody that's starting this journey or at the beginning, you are overestimating, how fast you're going to lose a bunch of weight and somehow you're going to get this thing under control, but you're underestimating the value of the journey and all the gold that you pick up along the way. And you're underestimating what it feels like to be in a really good groove and to have deeply repaired and improved your reputation with yourself. Those are that's the gold that is buried in the ground that you don't even know you're digging for. You're just digging to try to have this overriding self-discipline to stay out of the crap so that you can lose weight, so that you can be proud of your body. And it's like, no, it's actually quite a bit richer journey than that. And that's kind of what your graph is talking about. Beautiful. All good.
Yeah. And I really like the way you describe that in terms of overestimating what you can do in a day, because it is not something that happens in quick fix in the world of gimmicks, like you talked about when we started this conversation. It's something that occurs in what I think you called in one of our previous episodes a study methodology. And the self-esteem pieces that come from making the physical change are part of the whole experience. And none of it is going to happen all at once. Now, that being said, there's also ways that this is going to happen more quickly than maybe what people think. And I've heard you talk about this too with the internal audience and how you can change this concept of an internal audience very quickly. I found that to be the case as well. You referenced that internal audience a little bit ago. Do you want to go into that just maybe a little bit more about how you have seen people maybe capitalize on the internal audience more quickly than they might imagine in a journey like this?
Yes. When people begin a journey like this, they're aiming at a goal, and the goal is that they're so frustrated with themselves and the feedback they get from other people from being overweight, and they crave acceptance, and they also crave pride that when other people look at them, other people will not be disgusted, and in fact other people might find them attractive. Okay, so these are universal human desires that when you're overweight, you understand that you are presenting yourself at a substantial disadvantage, and that there's a lot of negative inferences that people make about you, and there could be financial, social, all kinds of consequences, not to mention health consequences. But the most important thing is that when people begin this goal, what they are seeking is that they are seeking admiration and acceptance from other people. And that's what's in their imagination. What they don't know, and they can't believe that they could think that differently about themselves until that happens. It's like and sometimes because that's how they believe their nervous system works or their psychology works, they feel overwhelmed by the process. So they feel like, well, if I have to lose 100 pounds before anybody finds me attractive or more appealing, then God, it just seems like it's way too long of a journey. It's like hiking to the North Pole. It's just going to be, I'll never do it. The thing is that if people have sufficient tenacity, as you did, and have a very good direction that they're walking, so they're going to actually have some success. What they don't see coming is that if you do, as I said, 20 days, if you showed up to work 20 days early, reputations change on a certain amount of evidence. So if a flake shows up early 2 days in a row, that's not enough evidence to convince anybody. But if the person who had been a flake shows up early for work 20 days in a row, that starts to get everybody's attention. Okay, you can't not be impressed by that. And you have to start considering the possibility that there has been a fundamental change in that person's future. That they have changed they can do it, and it appears that they will. So the reputations are changing. Now, so the same thing happens internally, is that it's not just from the outside. So the problem is, when you begin a weight loss journey, you are beginning with what's in mind is, I want other people to see me as more appealing, more self-disciplined, more attractive, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you lose 5 pounds, nobody says anything because they can't even tell. And the truth is, 5 pounds is no small thing. Done properly, without a gimmick, to lose 5 pounds of fat is no joke. That actually takes a substantial amount of self-discipline and a change in your behavior that happens over quite a reasonable period of time, like a month. Okay. And so nobody's going to be clapping for you. But the fascinating thing is, if you do things right for a month and you do drop 5 pounds, but you still got 65 to go, somebody is watching, and it's you. And the thing is that how you feel about yourself starts to change, and it changes way ahead of anybody else's feedback. And so it might only take a month before suddenly, if the flake shows up for work early for a month, it's not like all has been forgiven about the last 5 years of you being a flake. But there is a shift in everybody's attitude towards you. And the same thing happens inside. If you do things right for a month, there's a shift in this device that we call the internal audience. Freud would have called it maybe your superego. The cognitive therapists call it the internal critic. We all recognize that we live our lives as if people are watching us. It's an important evolutionary device inside of human nature, probably extremely closely associated with what conscience is, which is how you're going to get a bunch of people living together that can acquire a little property but not steal it from each other. Otherwise, group living might not work out so well. But if you evolve a conscience alongside group living and cooperation, then you can feel like other people are watching you, even when they're not, when you want to steal the other guy's acorns. Okay, this is a deep-seated architecture of human motivation. And if you don't do it, you may feel guilty even thinking about it, but then when you don't do it, you feel morally okay. But if you do steal his acorns to try to get away with it, you'll feel guilty and a little weird, and you're living under the gun. It feels uncomfortable. So that feeling of moral rightness, that we have done things properly, nobody has to be watching us, and nobody has to give us any feedback at all. We are watching ourselves. And so that's the beauty and the surprise, that after a few weeks of doing things very, very well, we find our internal audience starting to praise us. And nobody else in the world might be praising us because they can't see any difference, and they don't believe in anything that we're doing, and they could even be criticizing us. But the internal audience is watching. And so that's what gets underestimated, and that becomes It's no help early. You put out all this energy early, and other people are going to even criticize your path, for goodness sakes. And your, as you would say, all the physical side is largely going against you because you're now going towards less rich foods, and your internal audience is not particularly praising you. So all you have is a vague theory and some tenacity. And so, but the point is, if you stick with it for long enough, we start to see this turn around and we find gold that was there that we didn't even know was there, which is the internal audience shifting its balance of its judgment away from self-disgust to pride. And that is the pill for which nobody has. There is no shortcut to that. The only way to get that is through consistent, effective, morally sound action. And so that's that's your staircase. In other words, that's you have to face the self-disciplinary problem. It's not easy at all to do this against the pleasure trap. But if you do, it isn't just an empty thing that winds up succeeding in your weight loss and getting you esteem from other people. It actually, as you do that, the coinage is earned much earlier, and the signals start coming that this thing called self-esteem starts to be repaired. And that's, that is the unsung hero of that process.
And I'd like to just explain what that felt like and looked like in me, because
Yes.
I think that a specific example of that could help someone in their journey. So for me, I talked about being a binge eater and a volume eater. So, and of course, someone who weighed twice of what I weigh right now, that's a lot of food, right?
Yes.
And it's a lot of things that I think in mainstream society that people want to gawk at, and they expect that as I tell this story that I share those types of things that people would gawk at it. I prefer to leave that to people's imagination, because that story's been told many times. It's prevalent in the media, it's prevalent in movies, all sorts of places. This is not prevalent in the media. What you just described, that is very fundamental and an integral part of this journey. For me, it was the difference between what I felt between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And physically, of course, when I was eating, I felt better at night. But when we're talking about the types of food that I was eating in the volumes that I was eating, that's physically uncomfortable at night. It's also very emotionally uncomfortable at night. I've known for years that I should be eating more fruits and vegetables. I've known, that I should not be having high fat foods. I've known that all of these things cause problems in the long term, from a diabetes standpoint, from a heart disease standpoint, from a cancer standpoint, from all sorts of problematic places. And I still couldn't figure out how to make the change. And that weighed emotionally very heavy on me. And even in the morning after a day that was bad, I would feel this psychological weight. And that's where it would be. This is a complicated feeling, because I liked who I always say I liked who I was, but I liked who I am. I like who I am. It's all the same. I'm the same person. I did not like how I felt. And that's really what you're describing and what I experienced in my journey. And I remember being surprised how early that happened. And it actually even happened for me earlier than 20 days. I remember in 2020 being like I was in week 2 of the change. And when I woke up in the morning, there was this sense of freedom, from the fact that I didn't have to think about how I needed to live differently to be the person that I wanted to be. And that freedom was one of the first things that I think I felt that gets at the internal audience. And as part of what I did in those early weeks, when I realized that, I also made a visual aid that tracked what that feeling felt like and what happened around the food that I ate, that these were the things I felt that did not align with the language that I did not have around internal audience. But really, when I made these choices, my internal audience didn't like that because I knew I shouldn't be making those choices. And then when I did this, my internal audience would like this choice. And at the bottom of it, I put, I want this every single day, all the time. And I memorized this cause effect list that I visualized as I was making the changes. And a lot of this took place during COVID. I was calling it up a lot because I was making standard American diet food and I was eating food along my journey. And so I was constantly in this place where I was visualizing the way my internal audience responded and the outcomes of what happened that I did not like in my life when I did not make the choices and then when I did make the choices. And that's part of the complexity of the journey because I think it's also still I'm still able to like who I was. I did like who I was. I had a career I enjoyed, family, all of that I loved, relationships, that people who are still my friends that were part of my life then, who are part of my life now. And it's possible to enter into a self-improvement journey um, without the whole self-loathing that's a binary with this, love of who I am that betrays who I was. And I think if we get into talking more about identity, which I hope we will at a later point, because I think there's a lot in this that is probably still unsaid, but that's a lengthy explanation of really what does this look like? What it looks like is it looks like freedom between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. and waking up with a clear conscience, so to speak, about making the right decisions for myself that I have learned to capitalize on now because I recognize the trajectory that happens if I go 3 days. I think we talked about Thanksgiving, and I used to go 3 days on a bad streak. 3 days is harder to recover from than one day. And so I really tried to limit my failures because I don't always succeed in eating when hungry, even today. And I want to reverse that internal audience feeling earlier than I've let it go in the past.
Outstanding. All good.
Yeah, that's a long explanation there.
No, this is all terrific. With people that you work with, and as you're synthesizing, what it is that you've learned that was particularly important for you. Where would be important ideas for people to start with, first of all, and second of all, to not forget, how do people learn more about you and get into contact with you, etc. So, but the first things first, which is, where would you begin if you were talking to yourself 3 years ago and you look back over your shoulder? It's like, okay, where are some good places to begin this process? Because there's going to be people listening to this that, like you, are bright, pretty well educated, have thought about it for 25 years, have basically stuck their toe in the water 6 different times, never really gotten wet. You know what I mean? Never really have dived in the pool. So sort of give me any place that makes sense for you to pull people a little deeper in the water a little more quickly.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this idea a lot because more and more people are reaching out to me. And that's, I think, something that gives me pause to want to give good advice. So
Right.
there are two things that really, from the broadest possible view, thinking about what we've talked about today, that I think are going to be helpful. One is to think about that override. Override is a verb. Override is action. Override is a series of actions, a series of small steps. And as we think about the pleasure trap, think about this override as a physical override that you can do in your system. And the more that you can understand the cause effect relationships in your body around the science of the why. So there's the science of the why, and then there's the art of yourself. And the more deeply you can go into understanding how food works in you through experiment, through being the researcher, through being the agent of your change, and really taking the time to understand that, the better off you're going to be. It's not going to make it easier, but the only reason I can succeed the way I do is because I have figured out the equation of the foods that I eat that take away the agitation of my nervous system. And when I follow my action plan, which is no longer a mystery to me, I can override my hunger drive to be successful. And I fail at that. And the action plan is always the same. It is eat plants, avoid processed foods. And then there are, my staircase, those are the processed foods that I avoid. And then I can do that override. So do not give up on the override, and think about how you can override that. And it's not going to just be one step, but there's going to be multiple steps over time. The other thing that I would say really goes into our last episode, and something that I just alluded to too, and that is the art of being you. And it is your personality. It is the fact that you have to find a way to be your own change agent. And how are you going to deal with success? How are you going to deal with failure? How are you going to avoid all or nothing thinking? How are you going to avoid the ego trap of managing your own expectations of yourself and what happens with you when you fail? Because it will happen, and it will not matter if it is I think sometimes people look at me and think I don't know how to fail anymore, but the feeling of failure a lot of times is the same as when I was failing with potato chips and pizza. And it's a constant muscle to exercise. How are you going to manage your own expectations? So, two things: learn about the override and know how to be your own agent of change to guide yourself through the process.
Terrific. All right. Where can people contact you to get help?
Yes. So my social media is Transform Shadows. I have a website, transformshadows.com. I have a growing social media, Instagram following, a growing Facebook audience. And then, of course, if people are watching this, this is on my YouTube as well. So that's where they can find me. And I just really appreciate you being here today, and to delving into this really deep conversation that is about the physical aspects of the pleasure trap, but also goes far beyond that and into that world of self-esteem that I think is going to be helpful for people to consider as they think about their own journeys.
Fabulous. Thanks for having me, and great conversation. And we've got, I think, at least one more major conversation in our series. And so we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lyle. Bye now.
Fantastic, Dr. Lyon, Dr. Tania Lyon, a tremendous success story. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
That's right.